The ocean is silent, not calm, not peaceful, silent, and in the deepest layers of the Cold War, silence was not the absence of sound. It was the presence of something hunting. Imagine serving aboard a Soviet warship in the 1980s. The Arctic wind cuts through steel decks. Radar scans the horizon. Sonar operators stare at green screens glowing in the dark. Somewhere beneath you, thousands of feet below the surface, there's something you cannot see, something you cannot hear, but you know it's there. An American submarine, and not just any submarine. A predator designed to stalk, to listen, to follow, and, if necessary, to destroy. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what the United States built beneath the ocean during the Cold War didn't just challenge the Soviet Navy, it psychologically dominated it. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why many Soviet sailors believed they were never truly alone at sea. This is the story of the submarine that haunted the Soviet Navy, the Los Angeles-class attack submarine. To understand why it became a ghost in Soviet nightmares, we need to go back to a time when the oceans were not trade routes. They were battlefields waiting to ignite. The Cold War was not just fought in the skies with fighters and spy planes. It wasn't only missiles in silos or tanks in Europe. The most dangerous arena was hidden, cold, and unforgiving, the deep ocean. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Soviet Union had dramatically expanded its submarine fleet. They were building ballistic missile submarines capable of launching nuclear warheads from beneath the Arctic ice. These submarines were the backbone of their nuclear deterrent. If war came, they would retaliate from the depths, and that terrified American strategists. Because once a ballistic missile submarine disappears into the ocean, it becomes nearly impossible to track, unless you build something better. The United States Navy understood something critical. Control of the sea was no longer about aircraft carriers alone. It was about who could control the unseen world below the surface. America needed a submarine that was faster than anything before it, quieter than anything the Soviets could detect, equipped with sonar, so advanced it could hear a ship's propeller from miles away. Armed not just to defend, but to hunt, the result was the Los Angeles class. When the first of these submarines entered service in the mid-1970s, it represented a technological leap forward. It wasn't just an improvement, it was a statement. Powered by a nuclear reactor, it could remain submerged for months. It didn't need air. It didn't need to surface. It didn't need to announce its presence. It could move across entire oceans without ever being seen. And it was fast, over 30 knots submerged, faster than many surface ships, fast enough to chase down Soviet submarines attempting to reposition under the ice. But speed alone doesn't win underwater warfare. Silence does. The Los Angeles class was engineered with one mission in mind: acoustic dominance. Every rotating component inside the submarine was designed to reduce noise. Special mounting systems minimize vibration. The hull was shaped for hydrodynamic efficiency. Sound dampening techniques reduced acoustic signatures to levels that, at the time, were nearly revolutionary. Underwater, sound is everything. Sonar operators listen for tiny anomalies, a faint hum, a mechanical rhythm, a cavitation ripple in the distance. And American submarines were trained not just to fight, but to listen. The sonar systems aboard the Los Angeles class were among the most advanced in the world. Massive spherical arrays in the bow could detect contacts at extraordinary distances. Towed arrays trailed behind the submarine, like invisible fishing lines, picking up subtle vibrations in the water. While Soviet captains worried about being tracked from the surface or sky, American submarines were already behind them, watching, listening, following. And here is where the psychological dimension begins. The United States didn't just build a submarine, it built uncertainty. Soviet ballistic missile submarines, the crown jewels of their nuclear deterrent, were now potentially being followed every time they left port. Imagine commanding a nuclear submarine tasked with ensuring your nation's survival, knowing that somewhere in the darkness, an American vessel might be shadowing you from miles away. You can't hear it, you can't see it, but you suspect it's there. That suspicion changes behavior. It forces caution. It slows operations. It creates stress. And during the Cold War, psychological advantage was as powerful as any torpedo. The Los Angeles class wasn't just deployed in one theater. It operated in the Atlantic, the Pacific, under the Arctic ice, near Soviet naval bases. These submarines would quietly track Soviet ballistic missile submarines as they departed port, gathering acoustic signatures, mapping patterns, and sometimes stay on their tail for days, sometimes weeks. There are declassified accounts of American submarines operating so close to Soviet vessels that minor navigation errors could have caused collisions, and in a few cases they did. Underwater collisions between U.S. and Soviet submarines occurred during the Cold War. Silent incidents rarely discussed publicly at the time. These were not accidents born of incompetence. They were the result of aggressive shadowing operations conducted in total secrecy. That's how close the invisible war had become. But the Los Angeles class wasn't only about tracking. It was armed with Mark 48 torpedoes, sophisticated, high-speed weapons capable of hunting submarines and surface ships. Later variants carried Tomahawk cruise missiles, giving them the ability to strike land targets from hundreds of miles away. This meant a Los Angeles-class submarine could track your ballistic missile submarine, destroy your attack submarine, strike your naval base, and disappear, all without ever surfacing. Stay with me, because what we're building toward is something even more significant. How this submarine fundamentally reshaped naval strategy and forced the Soviet Navy into a defensive posture it never fully escaped. The invisible war beneath the waves was not about dramatic explosions or televised confrontations. It was about patience, precision, and dominance through silence. The crews of these submarines trained relentlessly. Life aboard was claustrophobic. No sunlight, no fresh air, weeks without seeing the sky. Every movement calculated, every sound monitored, because one mistake, one unnecessary noise, could give away your position. American submariners developed a culture of quiet excellence. They knew their advantage was fragile. They protected it through discipline. Meanwhile, Soviet engineers worked desperately to reduce the noise of their own submarines. Early Soviet designs were notoriously louder than their American counterparts. Cavitation from propellers, reactor noise, mechanical vibration, all of it made them easier to detect. And detection underwater is vulnerability. The Los Angeles class exploited that vulnerability. As we move deeper into this story, we'll examine real missions, Arctic operations, and moments where the world came dangerously close to escalation. Moments most Americans never even heard about. Because the greatest victories of the Cold War often happened in silence. And the submarine that haunted the Soviet Navy did its job so well that much of what it accomplished remains classified even today. In the next part, we'll dive into specific encounters, operations beneath the Arctic ice cap, cat-and-mouse pursuits in the Atlantic, and how American submariners turned the ocean itself into a strategic weapon. And by the end of this story, you'll see how the Los Angeles class didn't just defend America, ensured that the Soviet Navy could never operate with confidence in its own waters again. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more intense this invisible war becomes. By the late 1970s, the Cold War had entered a phase few civilians truly understood. Publicly, diplomats negotiated treaties. Cameras flashed during summits. Speeches were delivered about détente and stability. But beneath the surface of the Arctic Ocean, the war had never been colder. The Soviet Union had developed what it believed was a secure strategy for nuclear deterrence. Instead of sending ballistic missile submarines into the vast, open Atlantic where they could be hunted, they began adopting a concept known in the West as the Bastion strategy. The idea was simple. Protect your most valuable submarines inside heavily defended areas close to home waters, under Arctic ice, within range of land-based air cover, surrounded by surface ships and attack submarines. If American submarines couldn't penetrate these bastions, Soviet ballistic missile submarines would remain safe, guaranteeing second strike capability. It was a logical plan, but it underestimated one thing: the Los Angeles class. Operating beneath Arctic ice is one of the most dangerous environments imaginable. There are no waves, no visible horizon, no easy access to the surface. Ice thickness varies unpredictably. Navigation requires precision measured in feet, not miles. Yet American submarines trained specifically for this. The Los Angeles class was built to operate where others hesitated, under the polar ice cap. Sonar behaves differently. Sound waves reflect unpredictably. Temperature layers shift acoustic paths. Detection becomes both an art and a science. And American crews mastered both. There were missions where Los Angeles-class submarines would quietly slip beneath the Arctic ice and position themselves near Soviet patrol routes, waiting, listening, mapping patterns of movement, recording acoustic signatures unique to each Soviet submarine. Every submarine has a fingerprint, subtle mechanical characteristics that allow trained analysts to identify it specifically. Once recorded, that submarine could be tracked more easily in the future. Think about what that means. If a Soviet ballistic missile submarine left Murmansk, slipped under the ice believing it was hidden, and an American submarine had already cataloged its acoustic signature, it was no longer anonymous. It was tagged. In some operations, American submarines followed Soviet boats so closely that sonar operators could hear internal machinery shifts, the hum of turbines, the rhythm of propeller blades, close enough that, if war had broken out, engagement would have required seconds. But war did not break out, and that was precisely the point. The mission was not to attack. The mission was to demonstrate, silently, that the United States could, if necessary, eliminate the core of the Soviet deterrent. This knowledge forced Soviet naval planners into a dilemma. If their ballistic missile submarines were vulnerable even inside defended bastions, then their nuclear strategy was compromised. To compensate, they had to dedicate more resources to anti-submarine warfare, more patrol ships, more aircraft, more attack submarines tasked with finding American hunters. Resources diverted, attention divided, confidence eroded, and the Los Angeles class kept operating. Meanwhile, in the Atlantic, similar cat-and-mouse games unfolded. Soviet attack submarines attempted to track American carrier battle groups. American submarines attempted to track Soviet attack submarines, each side probing the other's defenses. But Western intelligence assessments repeatedly concluded something uncomfortable for Moscow. American submarines were generally quieter. That acoustic advantage was not a minor technical detail. It was a foundation of underwater supremacy. Because if you can hear your enemy before he hears you, you control the engagement. There were moments of extreme tension. In one well-documented Cold War incident, a U.S. and Soviet submarine collided while maneuvering in close proximity during a shadowing operation. Both sides publicly minimized the event. Privately, it was a stark reminder how dangerously close the invisible war had become. Imagine being inside a steel cylinder hundreds of feet below the surface when another submarine scrapes against your hull. No explosion, no missile launch, just the grinding sound of two nuclear powers touching in the dark. The Los Angeles class was not designed recklessly. It was designed aggressively, but intelligently. Beyond torpedoes, later variants incorporated vertical launch systems capable of firing Tomahawk cruise missiles. That meant a submarine operating undetected near Soviet shores could, within minutes, strike command centers, radar installations, or naval bases. Strategic reach from total concealment. This dual capability, hunter-killer and land attack platform, expanded the submarine's role beyond pure anti-submarine warfare. It became a strategic instrument of pressure. And pressure, during the Cold War, was everything. Inside the submarine, life continued in cycles of watch rotations and silent meals. Sailors slept inches from torpedoes. Conversations were hushed. Every clang of metal was avoided. Even dropping a tool could become a serious mistake. Discipline wasn't cosmetic. It was survival. Los Angeles-class submariners were trained to think differently. They weren't surface warriors. They were underwater tacticians. Patience was their weapon. Silence was their shield. There's an often-repeated phrase among submariners. There are only two kinds of ships, submarines and targets. It wasn't arrogance. It was confidence built on capability. As the 1980s intensified and tensions surged once more, particularly during moments like the deployment of intermediate-range missiles in Europe and escalating rhetoric between Washington and Moscow, the oceans remained the most critical and least visible front. Soviet commanders understood they were being watched. Western analysts later revealed that American submarines had achieved such proficiency in tracking Soviet ballistic missile submarines that, in some scenarios, A significant portion of the Soviet sea-based deterrent could have been neutralized early in a conflict. That reality changed strategic calculations. It influenced arms control negotiations. It shaped naval budgets. It forced technological innovation. The Soviet Union began producing quieter submarines, such as the Akula class, in direct response to American acoustic superiority. The underwater arms race intensified, but the Los Angeles class had already established a precedent: dominance through stealth. And as we move into the next phase of the story, we'll explore how this class of submarines evolved, how it adapted to new threats, and how its legacy extended far beyond the Cold War, shaping modern naval warfare even today. Because the submarine that haunted the Soviet Navy didn't disappear when the Cold War ended. It simply adapted to a new era. And the lessons it taught about invisible power still define the balance beneath the waves. In the next part, we'll go even deeper into modernization, real-world operational impact, and the lasting strategic consequences of America's underwater supremacy. By the mid-1980s, something had shifted. The Cold War was still dangerous. Nuclear arsenals were still pointed across oceans. But inside naval intelligence circles, there was a quiet understanding emerging. The balance under the sea had tilted. The Los Angeles class was no longer just a new submarine. It was the backbone of American undersea dominance. Dozens were now in service. They were not rare assets. They were everywhere. Atlantic, Pacific, Mediterranean, Arctic. That scale mattered, because dominance is not achieved by having one superior platform. It is achieved by having enough of them to be unpredictable. For the Soviet Navy, uncertainty became constant. If a ballistic missile submarine prepared to leave port, planners had to assume an American submarine might already be waiting beyond coastal waters. If a Soviet surface group deployed into the North Atlantic, they had to consider that a Los Angeles-class submarine could be tracking them from below. Even Soviet-attacked submarines, designed to hunt Western carriers, were increasingly forced to look over their shoulders. And here's what made the situation more uncomfortable for Moscow. The United States Navy was not merely reacting, it was shaping the environment. American doctrine evolved around aggressive forward deployment. Rather than waiting defensively along U.S. coastlines, Los Angeles-class submarines operated near Soviet naval bases. They monitored choke points. They mapped undersea terrain. They rehearsed wartime scenarios in peacetime. This was not symbolic presence. It was preparation. Under the Arctic ice, operations became more sophisticated. American submarines practiced surfacing through ice, launching simulated strikes, navigating beneath thick polar sheets where communication with the outside world was nearly impossible. Every successful Arctic patrol sent a subtle message: there is nowhere you can hide. Meanwhile, the submarines themselves continued to evolve. Later variants of the Los Angeles class introduced significant improvements. Noise reduction techniques advanced. Combat systems were upgraded. Vertical launch systems expanded missile capability. Electronics became more integrated, more responsive, more precise. The submarine that had already been dangerous became more versatile. But the most important evolution wasn't hardware. It was experience. By the late Cold War period, American submariners operating Los Angeles-class boats had accumulated thousands of patrol days tracking Soviet vessels. They had learned patterns, habits, reaction times, maneuvering tendencies. Underwater warfare is deeply psychological. If you know how your opponent reacts under pressure, you gain advantage before the first weapon is fired. And American crews knew their adversaries. There were moments when Soviet submarines attempted evasive maneuvers to shake suspected American pursuers. Sudden depth changes, course reversals, speed bursts. Sometimes it worked. Often it did not. Because once a quiet submarine establishes a tracking position, disengagement is not simple. It's a three-dimensional chess match played in darkness. And the Los Angeles class excelled at it. Western analysts later described the situation bluntly. By the late 1980s, American submarines could likely neutralize a large percentage of Soviet ballistic missile submarines early in a conflict. Think about what that implies. The core of the Soviet second strike capability, the guarantee of retaliation, was at risk of being shadowed from the moment it left port. This didn't mean war was inevitable. It meant war was increasingly unfavorable, and deterrence is strongest when the opponent doubts his own advantage. There's an irony here. The Los Angeles class was built for war, but its greatest achievement may have been preventing one, because the knowledge of American underwater superiority created hesitation. It influenced negotiations. It contributed to strategic arms reduction conversations in ways rarely acknowledged publicly. When leaders sat at negotiating tables discussing submarine-launched ballistic missiles, they were not speaking abstractly. They understood the invisible chessboard beneath the ocean. Then came the final years of the Cold War. The Soviet Union faced internal economic strain. Technological competition was expensive. The naval arms race required immense investment. Quieter submarines, better sonar, new counter-detection technologies. Matching American submarine capability demanded resources the Soviet system struggled to sustain. And throughout that period, Los Angeles-class submarines continued their patrols. Quietly, relentlessly. By the time the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, the United States possessed not just a fleet advantage, but a generational lead in submarine warfare doctrine. But the story doesn't end with the Cold War, because a submarine designed to haunt one adversary could adapt to new realities. In the post-Cold War era, Los Angeles-class submarines participated in real combat operations. Tomahawk missiles launched from beneath the seas struck targets during conflicts in the Middle East. Intelligence-gathering missions expanded. Special operations support became part of the mission set. The Predator evolved. What had once been built to shadow Soviet ballistic missile submarines now projected power globally. And yet, even as new classes like the Seawolf and Virginia entered service, the Los Angeles class remained a critical component of the fleet for decades. Why? Because it had proven itself. It had demonstrated that technological superiority underwater could shape global strategy. Today, many of these submarines have been retired. Others served into the 21st century, but their legacy remains embedded in modern naval thinking. When contemporary strategists analyze undersea competition with rising powers, they do so through a lens shaped by the Cold War, a lens shaped by acoustic dominance, by forward deployment, by aggressive shadowing, by the principle that invisibility, when mastered, becomes power. But to truly understand why the Los Angeles class earned its reputation as a submarine that haunted the Soviet Navy, we need to step back one final time, not just to examine what it did, but to examine what it represented. In the final part of the story, we'll explore the human dimension, the mindset of crews, the strategic symbolism, and why the invisible victories beneath the ocean may have been among the most decisive of the entire Cold War. Because sometimes the wars that matter most are the ones no one sees, and the silence beneath the waves can change the course of history. When people think about the Cold War, they imagine missile silos and frozen fields, fighter jets screaming across European skies, nuclear warheads stacked in hardened bunkers. They imagine confrontation. They imagine noise. But the most decisive arena of that conflict was defined by the opposite: silence. The Los Angeles-class submarine represents something deeper than steel, reactors, torpedoes, or sonar arrays. It represents a strategic philosophy, one that understood that dominance does not always require spectacle. It requires presence, unseen presence. Imagine being a Soviet naval commander in the 1980s. You oversee fleets. You manage submarine patrol schedules. You plan deterrent strategies meant to guarantee national survival. And yet, in the back of your mind, there is an unanswerable question. Are we being followed? That uncertainty changes decisions. It affects deployment patterns. It increases caution. It forces resource allocation toward defense rather than initiative. It reshapes behavior. The Los Angeles class did not need to fire weapons to achieve impact. Its mission was to ensure that, at any given moment, American power might already be in position. And that possibility was enough. Submariners who served aboard these vessels rarely spoke publicly about their patrols. Much of what they accomplished remains classified, even now. They returned to port without parades, without headlines, without recognition from the public, because success meant nothing happened. No missiles launched, no torpedoes fired, no nuclear exchange. The measure of victory was the absence of catastrophe. There's a quiet courage in that. Weak submerged, No sunlight, no certainty about what might be waiting beyond the next sonar contact. Living in a controlled environment where discipline determined survival. Inside those steel hulls were young men entrusted with responsibilities few could fully comprehend. They carried weapons capable of reshaping continents. And yet their greatest contribution was restraint, backed by overwhelming capability. The invisible war demanded maturity. It demanded calm under pressure. It demanded faith in technology and trust in training. On the Soviet side, submariners faced similar isolation. They too operated in darkness, aware that American boats were likely nearby. They too carried the burden of deterrence. The ocean was indifferent to ideology. It swallowed fear and ambition equally. And yet, the technological edge achieved by the United States during this era shifted the strategic equilibrium. The Los Angeles class was not invincible. It was not perfect, but it was consistently superior in the domain that mattered most: acoustic stealth and operational reach. That superiority shaped doctrine for decades. Modern submarine warfare still revolves around the same principles refined during that era: silence, detection range, data integration, forward presence. When newer classes like Seawolf and Virginia were designed, they built upon lessons learned from Los Angeles patrols. The foundation had been laid beneath Arctic ice and Atlantic swells decades earlier. Today, global powers once again invest heavily in submarine fleets. Acoustic research continues. Undersea cables become strategic assets. Autonomous underwater vehicles are developed for surveillance and combat roles. The underwater domain remains central to great power competition, and the blueprint for mastering it was written during the Cold War. Written in steel, written in silence. The Los Angeles class did more than haunt the Soviet Navy. It redefined what naval dominance meant. It proved that the side which controls the unseen environment controls escalation itself. Because if you can silently hold your adversary's most critical assets at risk, you influence every negotiation, every deployment, every calculation. Deterrence is not only about having weapons. It is about convincing your opponent that you can use them effectively without ever needing to prove it. That was the quiet triumph of America's underwater fleet. When the Cold War ended, there was no dramatic underwater surrender, no final confrontation. In the Arctic depths, the submarines simply continued their patrols until new realities reshaped missions and budgets. But historians who examine declassified material increasingly recognize the role submarine superiority played in maintaining strategic stability. The world never saw the near-constant shadow in operations. It never heard the sonar pings in the darkness. It never felt the tension of two nuclear submarines maneuvering within yards of one another under thousands of tons of water. But those moments mattered. They formed the invisible scaffolding that kept the Cold War from collapsing into open conflict. And so, when we ask why the Los Angeles class earned its reputation as a submarine that haunted the Soviet Navy, the answer is not found in battle damage or dramatic footage. It is found in influence, in pressure, in silent dominance. It haunted not because it attacked, but because it could. It haunted because it proved that American technology and training had mastered one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. It haunted because Soviet commanders knew that beneath the waves, the balance was not equal. The ocean remains vast, dark, unpredictable. But during one of the most dangerous periods in human history, the United States ensured that beneath that darkness, it held the advantage. And that advantage may have helped keep the peace. The next time you look at the open sea, calm and endless, remember this. There was a time when somewhere below that surface, unseen and unheard, a submarine moved silently through the deep, listening, watching, waiting, and in that silence, it carried the weight of the world.